Occupy Wall Street is doing. And so not only am I of the opinion that it's the resurgent, thank God, where were you so long? I'm so grateful that they're here, and I do everything I can to support it and build it and strengthen it. And I must say, as a student of mass movements all my life, for a movement that has been in existence for 5 weeks, I can't think of anything in American history, left, right, or center, that has grown as fast and as powerfully as this thing has. But that augurs really well, and in which every police repression has the boomerang opposite effect because of the way it's carried out, including the other night's owing to California horrors, and even those last night a little bit in New York. Strikes me as, yeah, I think we're seeing the emergence of something that is saying, my goodness. Just a little footnote. Yesterday, the Congressional Budget Office released a document, a study of income inequality in the United States between 1979 and 2007. If you have a moment to go on the internet and read this thing, it's worth it. And it's worth it for 2 reasons. The CBO is pretty well respected. It's considered to be a rather nonpartisan congressional research service. So a lot of people use that from different perspectives. You've got a kind of reliable, let's call it, companion. And there's really nothing all that new that people didn't know, but it's nicely assembled. It's from this revered source. And there you get the most extreme discussion you could imagine. I mean, basically showing that the Occupy Wall Street people were 100% on the money. It's organized to show what happened over the last 30-odd years to the 1% at the top of the income distribution relative to the other 99%, using that dividing line, which is exactly what Occupy Wall Street did with its "We are the 99% slogan, a slogan which in retrospect was a genius stroke, and they ought to be given the respect that comes from having figured that out. And here's a report that documents the grotesque better outcome of the last 30 years for the 1% relative to the 99%, but not just in terms of how much more of the total income they gathered into their own hands, the 1%. The 1% went from getting roughly 10% of our total income to roughly 20%. Everybody else lost as a share of the total national income over those 30 years, number one. But even more interesting in that report, they factored in the effect of government transfer payments and federal tax payments. And in other words, they took into account the ostensible role of the government in offsetting the private distribution of income so that there would be, typically it is said, a more egalitarian distribution than you would have absent a progressive income tax structure and absent transfer payments. Their research showed that if you take into account transfer payments and government taxes, the inequality of income is greater, not less. The government does not redistribute downward, the government actually redistributes upward, showing that over those 30 years, not only did the top 1% grab an enormous extra chunk of income, but they were smart enough to use it to change government policy so it not only offset what they were doing, it facilitated it. And really, at that point, I should stop talking and play the national anthem.
Any more? The one in the gray shirt.
Yeah. Well, I guess this is a question for either or both of you, but it's off of Professor Wolff, what I see as the point of your talk. I'm a member of the Park Slope Food Co-op, which is 16,000 members who cooperate. Is there something in here that economists look at that helps us with, you know, what human nature is like in here, like the struggle to be cooperative, and the struggle to get for lack of a better word, the patterns of thinking in people's heads out? Because you can have this, what it is, it's a food co-op, you know, we sell food to our members and everybody works. And then supposedly everybody decides how to run it. And one of the problems that always comes out is greed. You know, and we live in a society where greed is elevated by the structure of things. But how do you get that out? How do economists think about that at all, or is that just outside the realm?
Well, actually, I don't think I'm the best person to answer this. I'm fairly sure that Professor Wolff has written a lot about related issues. But look, I think that we're victims of a false divide between in our thinking, and certainly in the way economics is taught and understood, between notions of self-interest and other regarding considerations. I think that human beings, in fact, have a diverse set of motivations, and any real social science would start with that premise, that they have a diverse set of motivations, and it would attempt to empirically describe those, and then to explore the implications of the fact that people possess diverse motivations for the actual functioning and the potential structuring or design of institutions of various kinds. Instead, we have a social science, certainly in economics this is the case, which begins with a highly stereotyped a priori description of what it is that human beings are motivated by, which is ideological and false. And against that, we pose, on the other side, a notion of human beings as altruistic or cooperative. Well, those are different things, but as entirely altruistic or other regarding, and we reject that straw man as being unrealistic. So to my mind, a lot of the recent research, which claims to be opening up economics by showing that people have so-called altruistic motivations or other regarding motivations, is really rather worthless, because we knew that all along, or we ought to have known that. You know, that's an internal polemic which does do some work in negating one straw man, perhaps with another, but it's not, I think, it's not ultimately very helpful. So with respect to your very pressing question of how to organize cooperative activity or endeavor, I think that we need to have a lot more empirical research on what works and what doesn't, and how. You know, Elinor Ostrom won the Nobel Prize in economics for her work demonstrating, again, something we all ought to have known, which is that it is not true that the a prioristic idea that every problem of common property management dissolves into a war of all against all through a multi-person prisoner's dilemma. And in fact, there are ways in which people solve such problems all the time and find ways to safeguard resources. She empirically demonstrated this through a series of cases, and hats off to her for having had the patience to do that. My God, I wouldn't have had that patience. But that somebody has the patience to spend their career, you know, documenting such things for the benefit of people who can't see the reality, can't see realities that are in front of them, is a good thing, I suppose. But certainly I have assigned her in my microeconomic theory class before she won the Nobel Prize for that reason, without wanting to put her on a pedestal. But simply because there's so very little social science of that kind. But what we need to do is to similarly chart and investigate the diverse examples of human cooperation, which indeed are at the same time realistic in their regard for questions of how learning happens, how innovations can be shared, how productivity can be brought about where that is important for societies to ensure to a certain degree. All of these are applied questions for social science, which ought to be more fully investigated. You know, in the literature on production cooperatives, there is some of this, and there are some lessons to be learned from this. And there are some outstanding examples which are often pointed to. For instance, the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain, which have gotten into some trouble in recent years, but which are one example of a highly successful cooperative system, engaged in a wide variety of economic activities. You won't see any readings about the Mondragon cooperatives, or indeed any others, on a microeconomic theory syllabus, practically anywhere in the United States. Why not?
I could respond too. My wife is a psychotherapist. When I first, years ago, made the mistake over dinner one night, explaining to her, or trying to, what the presumption of the economics profession was about the motivations of human beings when they enter markets, she thought it was making a joke. When she realized it wasn't making a joke, she almost fell off the chair laughing on the grounds that 2 weeks into a freshman introduction to psychology, no one in their right mind would attribute that quality of behavior and that set of motivations so narrowly focused on consumption as if nothing else in life mattered. It's great. It is so bizarre that I think everybody knows, as Professor Reddy says, much better than that. So you have to ask, why would people who are perfectly able to understand the complexity of their own emotions and their own feelings and their own desires and those immediately around them, what in the world would make you think you can capture what a person's going to do in the market by drawing an indifference curve? What? And you realize because you need that to support a whole set of propositions, unsupportable any other way, and so you go backwards. You don't investigate how people behave to understand the economy. You begin with a notion of how the economy must be working, and then you infer a behavior pattern and you stick with it like a really loyal person, no matter how bizarre the story is that you have to tell. One other thing, I tried in my little talk to stress contradiction. It is possible, you know, that you want and don't want something at the same time. There is no place for this in economics. I don't know how to begin with handling such an idea, but at least since Hegel, most people who take some interest in philosophical questions understand that something can be and not be at the same time, and that you can want and not want something. I just ask you all to imagine for a moment some of the more murky moments in your love life. You wanted and didn't want it at the same time, and you have to navigate that. And that's what people do all the time, and a reasonable theory would try to begin to capture that, and it's relevant to your question. Because my guess is we all have in us things that might be described by the word greed, and things that might be described as collective, co-respective behavior. And what happens is a society brings forward some and represses other elements of a complex motivation. And the trick might be to see how you would organize a society that would bring forward those parts of ourselves we're happy about and diminish those that we're not. It is something that most religions have tried to do in their way. And it might be interesting to imagine thinking about an economic system with the same objective.
2 more questions and then we can wrap up. So, do you want to go?
Thank you. I'm just coming from some oral surgery, so if this is not coherent, I apologize. I'm sorry, Rick, I've been late. So. But I actually want to ask about human rights. Because my appreciation of the rights-based approach to development, well, first of all, this is usually a discourse of lawyers. Now we have economists. And the interesting thing about lawyers is, you know, they want to take people to court. You know, they want to enforce it. It's a right, okay? And so we say in the U.S., we hold these truths to be self-evident, okay, that all white males are created equal. And then we have a Bill of Rights, which are enforceable in courts. Okay. Globally, we have a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which all govern, you know, it's a General Assembly resolution of the United Nations. All governments at least implicitly agree, even though they violate them all the time. You know. And then, more controversial, a Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which some countries don't recognize, okay? I don't think you can take anyone to court in the U.S. for accusing them of violating the Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. You may be able to take people to court in Europe, in the European Court on Human Rights, although I don't know, you know, what scope it is. But somehow these concepts, which are self-evident or, you know, derived somehow, have to be enforceable. You know? And